On the 16th of October 1946, 10 former members of Hitler's government and Inner Circle made their way to the gallows inside of Nuremberg prison's gymnasium. These were men who had been condemned to death at the Nuremberg Trials, and those who had the noose secured around their necks were subjected to varying ordeals, but the executions that took place early that morning did not go well. They are remembered in history for being botched and performed poorly, and this did attract a degree of criticism. But there were many different reasons why the Nuremberg executions went terribly wrong, from an executioner who lied about his credentials to be able to legally kill, to the poor calculations made to ensure that the executions were performed swiftly and efficiently. The times for each of the men to be executed should have been a matter of seconds, but one of these took a shocking 28 minutes. But how did the Nuremberg executions go so wrong? As always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. One by one, the men who had been condemned to death at the Nuremberg Trials were brought into the gymnasium of the prison for their executions. The morning's proceedings did not go very well to begin with, as Hermann Göring, possibly the most senior of the Nazis condemned, was found dead inside of his prison cell after he had taken his own life, and he was a man who should have gone to the gallows shortly after. But Göring had the last laugh in the faces of the Allied forces. The executions began shortly after Göring's body was wheeled into the execution chamber to be shown to the witnesses that one of the prize defendants was dead, but John C. Woods, the executioner, had not performed this death. It was said that the executions in a brightly lighted prison gymnasium, where 3 black looming wooden gallows had been erected, were witnessed by a handful of Allied military officers and 8 journalists. There were 3 gallows to ensure that the executions could be performed swiftly and quickly, with 3 men being sent through the trapdoors shortly after each other. Then the first could be cut down and then placed in a coffin, before more condemned people would go to the gallows. But following the display of Hermann Göring's remains, the executions began, and specifically it began with the execution of the Nazi foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, a man who was said to have been one of the biggest warmongers of the Second World War. It was said of his execution that, at 1:11 a.m, he entered the gymnasium, and all officers, official witnesses and correspondents rose to attention. Ribbentrop's manacles were removed, and he mounted the steps, there were 13 to the gallows. With the noose around his neck, he said, "My last wish is an understanding between East and West." All present removed their hats. The executioner tightened the noose. A chaplain standing beside him prayed. The assistant executioner pulled the lever. The trap dropped open, with a rumbling noise, and Ribbentrop's hooded figure disappeared. The rope was suddenly taut, and swung back and forth, creaking audibly. But von Ribbentrop's execution was a signal of things to come, as it took around 14 minutes for him to be declared dead, as a drop length, which was meant to snap his neck and cause an instant death, was not calculated correctly, meaning he died the most suffering ordeal of pain strangulation. Some would say that this was befitting for such war criminals and people who were responsible for the evils of the Nazi regime, but let's remember that this was not intended by the Americans to happen. There were further problems inside the execution chamber that related specifically to the gallows that had been built. When the trapdoor was released, when everything was checked by John C. Woods, the trapdoor was said to have been too small for someone to cleanly fall through, and their velocity, then when the rope snapped tight, was not significant enough to snap their necks. The trapdoor slowed the fall down, but the trapdoor was not fixed properly when opened, which meant that the Nuremberg defendants also smashed their heads into this door when they fell through, meaning they sustained bleeding head injuries, which made the ordeals look more barbaric. From behind the curtain, the men were struggling as the rope strangled them and blood dripped out onto the floor, but this again was not intended, and some defendants even hit the sides of the trapdoor when falling through. Things were not going very well at all, but one man who was said to have been one of the reasons for this was the executioner John C. Woods. John C. Woods was the American executioner who would carry out the executions of the Nuremberg Trials. It was said of him that the executioner was US Master Sergeant John C. Woods, 43 of San Antonio, a short, chunky man who in his 15 years as a US Army executioner has hanged 347 people. Said he afterwards, "I hanged those 10 Nazis, and I'm proud of it. I wasn't nervous. A fellow can't afford to have nerves in this business. I want to put in a good word for those GIs who helped me. They all did swell. I'm trying to get them a promotion. The way I look at this hanging job, somebody has to do it. I got into it kind of by accident years ago in the States. But one thing to consider is that Woods had no prior experience in being an executioner until he was actually given the job, and he was categorised and remembered in history as a botching executioner. Much did not go well in his executions, and just imagine the type of person who would lie to become an executioner. He was a man who wanted to take the life of people, almost being a legal murderer. He would take around 70 lives in his work as an executioner, which is a lot less than he actually admitted to. Before the war had come to an end, between 1944 and 1945, Woods was even involved in the botched 11 executions of American soldiers who had committed crimes inside of occupied lands. Woods would also execute many other war criminals at different prisons around Germany, including Landsberg prison, but it was inside of the Nuremberg Gymnasium that Woods developed his reputation. It was claimed that his miscalculations with regards to the drop were what prolonged the suffering of some of the Nazi war criminals. This shows the unprofessionalism of the man compared with British executioner Albert Pierpoint, who very rarely made a mistake, and the calculations Woods made led to the Nazis falling through the gallows with a drop which was insufficient, and this did not snap their necks. This led to the slow strangulation of these Nazis, and in some cases it took many minutes for these men to be confirmed dead. Woods himself was a man who had a very strange end, as he was accidentally electrocuted whilst trying to fix a lighting set. However, the short drop rather than the long drop was what caused the issue. This was where a prisoner would fall shorter distances rather than the British long drop method, where a prisoner fell a longer distance and gathered more velocity, leading to the neck being snapped. But some executions in particular inside of that gymnasium were shockingly performed. Wilhelm Keitel was one of the most senior members of Hitler's government and cabinet. He was the most senior military official and was considered Hitler's lapdog and a yes-man, but his execution did not go very well. He entered the room after von Ribbentrop and was the first military leader to be executed under the concept of international law, bringing professional soldiers to justice for their crimes. Keitel entered the chamber 2 minutes after von Ribbentrop had gone through the trapdoor and was brought to a different gallows, and von Ribbentrop's body was still in the room hidden behind a curtain on the first scaffold, and the tight rope could be seen. Keitel, when he came in, did not seem too tense. He held his head up high whilst his hands were being tied and walked straight to the gallows. He replied to confirm his identity loudly, then walked up the gallows as if he was expecting to receive a salute. He did not need any help from the guards, and then he turned on the platform to look at the crowd, and he stood there proudly. He was asked for any final words and stated, "I call on Almighty God to have mercy on the German people. More than 2 million German soldiers went to their deaths for the fatherland before me. I now follow my sons, all for Germany." Then a hood was placed over his head, along with the noose, and he was then shuffled over the trapdoor. Keitel's uniformed body then plunged through the trapdoor, and it was said he showed a huge degree of courage facing his death, but Keitel's execution did not go well. It allegedly took 24 minutes for Keitel to be killed. As he fell through the trapdoor, the drop did not snap his neck, and instantly he slowly strangled to death and convulsed behind the curtain, and he also hit his head on the trapdoor as he fell, leaving Wilhelm Keitel bleeding profusely from his head. But possibly one of the strangest executions that occurred that day took place with Ulus Striker plunging through the trapdoor. Striker was a virulent, evil journalist who worked for Hitler. Striker's execution did not go very well at all, and he did not experience the quick and rapid death that he was intended. As the executioner positioned him over the trapdoor, he released a lever, and Striker went down kicking, and it's believed that he dislodged with his head the hangman's noose and knot from the intended position. A witness said that, at that instant the trap opened with a loud bang. He went down kicking. When the rope snapped taut with the body swinging wildly, groans could be heard from within the concealed interior of the scaffold. Finally, the hangman who had descended from the gallows platform lifted the black curtain and went inside. Something happened that put a stop to the groans and brought the rope to a standstill. After it was over, I was not in the mood to ask what he did, but I assume he grabbed the swinging body and pulled down on it. We're all of the opinion that Striker was strangled. With this, it's interesting to consider what John C. Woods, the notorious executioner of Nuremberg, actually did behind the curtain. With Striker groaning and moaning, Woods finished him off by pulling down on his body, thus strangling Ulus Striker to death, and being the main element that made his execution quicker, as it would have been a while for him to be executed and then pronounced dead if not. It's likely that Woods may have been embarrassed by his previous failings and botchings during the Nuremberg executions, and he was probably not willing to waste any more time. Fritz S was a slave driver of Hitler who was involved in gathering slave labour for the Third Reich and then distributing these people to work in horrific conditions. He would force people to work to death, and it was said of his execution that Fritz S was brought face to face with his doom. Wearing a sweater with no coat and looking wild-eyed, Saukel proved to be the most defiant of any except Striker. Here was a man who put millions into bondage on a scale unknown since the pre-Christian era. Gazing around the room from the gallows platform, he suddenly screamed, "I'm dying innocent. The sentence is wrong. God protect Germany and make Germany great again. Long live Germany. God protect my family." The trap was sprung at 2:26 a.m, and as in the case of Striker, there was a loud groan under the gallows pit as the noose snapped tightly under the weight of the body. The fact there was a loud groan indicates yet again that Saukel's neck did not snap, and that he actually was strangled to death rather than dying from a broken neck. But further executions did not go well, including that of Alfred Jodl. But the Nuremberg executions on the whole were rather botched, and the defendants who were sent crashing through the trapdoor took longer to succumb to their ordeal than they should have. Their death should have been relatively instant, but this did not take place, and it was a combination of a number of factors why this happened. The inexperience and poor form of the executioner John C. Woods, coupled with his miscalculations, and the terribly built gallows structure, led to the ordeal becoming more of a bloody incident. John C. Woods himself prided himself on the work he did that day, and he obviously achieved the goal of executing those remaining members of Hitler's government in a circle, but the executions have been considered very botched. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.